I don't know if it's, just the 3 or 4 of us, but whoever is here, welcome. And we're at a wonderful culminating moment for Gretchen to hear about her both research and project connected to her work entitled Come to Yourself, Building a Bridge of Dialogue and Understanding to Promote Spirituality. And I've really enjoyed my time in working with Gretchen, including all the parts with AU, having her potentially break new ground to try to be able to work with younger people. But she was very flexible from the very beginning of, limiting that to younger people, being teenagers and a few years older. At the same time, she may expand this work that you're about to hear at a later time of working with spiritual but not religious young people, getting their, helping them get their footing as they move forward in their journeys. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Gretchen to tell us about her work.
Hi, everyone. So the name of my project was Come to Yourself, Building a Bridge of Dialogue and Understanding to Promote Spirituality. I came to this project after I finished the Finding Your Mission in Life course with Professor Mathis. And I realized that for me, my mission in life was to be the handholder, the spiritual guide for people who are starting their journey. But I really have a very protective nature and very nurturing nature. And it's very important to me to make sure that anybody who's embarking on their spiritual journey is doing it in a very safe and healthy and productive manner. And a lot of the young people who I have contact with in my life come to me with questions. And when I ask them, so where are you going to look for information? Where are you finding topics to cover? How do you even start searches? A lot of them had no response, or the responses they had were very upsetting to somebody like me who's in the community, and I'm sure would be to a lot of you who are in the community, as the information that they're getting is very suspect, it's incomplete, it's definitely the kind of knowledge that would stop the journey or lead somebody potentially into crisis and more confusion versus forward. So from that time, I decided that what I wanted to do, especially when I left Yale University, was to find a way to be a conduit for as many people as possible when they're starting their journey. And in particular, to try to access younger people. And so when I came up with the idea of wanting to do this as my life's work from the university, I wanted to start with a project here while I still had access to all of you wonderful people to help guide me in doing this, to make sure that I was going to be as successful as possible, and as well as being responsible as possible in working with the younger generation. So my culminating project endeavors to assist and inform the growing population of young adults who are self-identifying as spiritual but not religious, or SBNR, or they're questioning their spiritual beliefs. Those who are openly questioning and deciding their gender identification, along with their connection to the physical body, are doing so in conjunction with questioning the religious doctrines and the societal norms of their upbringing in search of their own definition of self and of their spirituality. And recent studies have shown that this questioning begins as early as age 8, with many people starting to actively search for answers to the questions in their preteens and their young adult years. So for me, I really felt there needed to be a more accessible bridge to this community between these young seekers and searchers and the spiritual academic community that obviously has the knowledge and the patience and the time and the understanding to help guide these people on their journey. However, how do you access people at age 10, 12, 15, 18, when the predominance of the sources and the academic sources are at the graduate school level or beyond? Or a lot of the resources that are written in the books are written in such an academic voice and language that somebody who is 10 years old isn't going to be able to immediately comprehend what they're reading. So I wanted to start with the project where I actively sought out answers to the questions of where are these young people at in their spiritual journey now? How much do they know? What questions do they have that they're still seeking answers for? And what are the best resources and their current resources for finding answers? And from there, I then wanted to embark on creating this bridge. What are the methods and tools and materials that I could help create in order to be that conduit between the educational community and the young seekers? So for my project, the project actually consisted of, at first, a literature review, obviously, so that I, as well as the people who I'm communicating to, could have a more full understanding of what is the current climate on spirituality and religion in today's society amongst the younger generation, as well as who are the people in this younger generation who seem to be the most actively seeking answers to their questions. And in conducting this review, I uncovered that what is commonly referred to as Generation Z, and Generation Z is youngsters who are born between the mid to late 1990s up to about 2010. So we're really talking about people who are 15 to 27. And these are the current people who are actively starting to identify more and more as spiritual but not religious. This is the young community that has decided that the current gender identifiers, the current sexual orientation identifiers don't fit them, or more importantly, they don't want to be limited by them. So they have really started to openly demonstrate that they understand that who they are as a being is not automatically connected to their physical form. And by doing that, they now have put themselves in a situation where they need to find something to anchor that belief system in, something in their spiritual foundation that helps justify that belief that they as beings are not solely of their physical form. And their current religious traditions and upbringing for a lot of these people, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam, don't support enough of this open questioning of these paradigms. So they're starting to openly say and communicate that they are spiritual, but not religious. So we've also shifted from most young people identifying as atheist or agnostic, and they're choosing the term spiritual. But when you ask them what does spiritual mean, or what does being a spiritual person mean, they flounder for a complete definition. And that is something that I wanted to actively work to change by doing this project. So currently, there are over 64 accepted terms for gender identity, and there are more than 46 terms that are accepted by the LGBTQIA2+ community for sexual orientation. So that alone demonstrates that they are wide open to really shifting the paradigm of how we currently understand how people function in this society. Okay? Even the term LGBTQIA2+ constantly expands. You know, you really have to go back and look every couple months and see what new classification, you know, the community has decided to put up as an overall moniker so that other people can find themselves in the community. They are developing their own space apart from everything else. But just as we've seen culturally, when people identify their own community, that's anchored in some kind of faith. It's anchored in some kind of overall spiritual system. But the LGBTQIA community does not have a system. They're actively seeking one. And they're actively trying to find one that will sustain them, which will have them not only feel positive about who they are and their place in this life, but also help them develop positive relationships with other people. Because as we know, being able to accept yourself and feel that you belong and that you have value and that your unique perspective on this life matters is important to how you then relate to other people. And so that foundation is typically found in a lot of people's religious upbringings. And that is what this community is actively seeking. They are looking for something that makes them feel connected to the whole. And if they feel connected to the whole as these unique individuals, then they feel that they have something to contribute to the whole. And they have a reason for being here. And that, to me, is really important because, frankly, as a mother and as a person who grew up during a time when being biracial was brand new, and we were being told that we didn't have value or that we were mistakes. You know, seeing another community struggle with those same issues and same feelings of self-doubt, you know, and then obviously leading into, you know, very detrimental situations for themselves. It's very heartbreaking personally for me. And that's why this work is also very important for me, is to try to find a way for them to find a community in spirituality as much as they found a community in their own gender questioning and sexual questioning. So that was the foundation for this project. And that is also the foundation for why I wanted to move forward to really start to actively build that bridge. So my first step in doing that was to conduct a survey. I conducted an anonymous survey of 75 individuals between the ages of 18 and 27. I originally wanted to conduct it between the ages of 15 and 27, but in order to respect the procedures of the university, I started at 18. However, I will add a note, I 100% believe that at some point it would be valuable for a survey or some direct outreach to that younger contingency to occur. So my survey was between the ages of 18 and 27, and I divided the survey into 3 separate areas of questions. The first area was personal demographics. Everybody was anonymous, so nobody had to identify by name or age, you know, beyond just acknowledging that they were between the ages of 18 and 20. So I asked them what their race was or how they self-identified their race in particular. I asked them how they self-identified their gender, how they self-identified their sexuality. And the questions were open, so they could pick as many options as they wanted, or they could fill in a response. So everything was as open as possible to get as much information from them as possible. The next questions I asked about is, where do they currently reside in the United States or in the world? And the last one was, what was their religious upbringing? If they grew up within a particular tradition, if they grew up without religion being promoted in the household, or if they grew up discovering their own spiritual beliefs. The next set of questioning was regarding what was their current knowledge of transpersonal topics. I asked about when did they start questioning the spiritual beliefs, and if I can take a brief moment, I will share with you a graph of the results of that. Okay. Ted, I'll read it out loud since you may not be able to see it. This is a chart of the age ranges of the people and when they started questioning their spiritual beliefs. So we had almost about 8 people say that they've never questioned their spirituality. People between the ages said that between the age of birth to the age of 5, I had 5 people say that's when they started questioning their spiritual beliefs. Right? Between the ages of 6 to 10, we had over 15 people. Between the ages of 11 to 15, you see that's the lion's share, that was about 22. And between the ages of 16 to 20, still over 15. And at the age of 21, it was only over 5. So you can see that the majority of people in my survey, of 75 people between the ages of 18 and 27, the lion's share of them started their questioning in the preteen to teenage years. Okay. So this is when, and this was also extremely valuable to me because it also affirmed for me what I had presumed, which is at the same time that a lot of people are questioning their identity, which is when you start entering school and you start being around other people and people start questioning the differences, it's the same time that they're also starting to question, what do they believe in? And is it different from what they've been taught? So then I also started to ask them specific questions about spiritual, transpersonal topics, like what does it mean to be spiritual? And the questions were open-ended, meaning I left them ample room to write out a response. Some people wrote a sentence, some people wrote paragraphs regarding how they defined spirituality, how they defined consciousness, how they defined what a higher power was, if they believed in astrology or parapsychology or psi abilities, if they understood the flow of energy, chakras, prana, kundalini, and all of those received a response of either, like I said, a sentence or longer. The majority of the responses that came back demonstrated that there was a very cursory understanding of these topics, if they'd even heard of them at all. Like, for example, chakra was a word that people had heard of. They had no idea what it meant. I think out of the 75 responses, I got less than 5 that actually tried to say something about what it meant. Everyone else said, I don't know. If I asked what consciousness was, the majority of the answers were binary. It's either aware or unaware. So they had conscious and unconscious, which they were identifying more as sleep, or under, like unconscious for surgery. Like that was it. You were either aware or unaware. There was no other response regarding consciousness. Higher power was always defined as something outside. I think I had 2 people who actually said that higher power or spirit was something they were connected to. The rest of the people identified as something outside of themselves, whether it was God or energy, but it was always a part. It was never something that felt a connection. It was always a secondary thing. And when I asked about astrology or parapsychology, the majority of the answers were it's entertainment only, it's not real, there's no scientific proof. That was the number one answer. There was no scientific proof for either of these things. And it's purely for media purposes or entertainment purposes. If I asked about life after death, some people said that they had experiences but didn't know what it is, and therefore without scientific proof didn't know if there was or not. And one of the last questions I asked was, has anybody engaged in any spiritual practices? And let me pull that up as well, because that was an interesting one. All right, hold your eyes, I have to scroll to it. Here you go, ready? So let me shrink this a bit so I can get more of it on the page. Can you still see it if it's that small, or do you want me to make it bigger and scroll? I'll make it bigger. Is that better? Okay. Yes. So I'm asking everybody here, what spiritual practices have you participated in? Obviously, they were allowed to check more than one response. They were allowed to check as many things as they had done. So a lot of people, 87% of my participants had done some form of meditation. 83% said that they had practiced mindfulness, 35% dream analysis, 80% yoga, 33% affirmative prayer, 28% chanting, 51% some form of breath work, 33% fasting, 53% kept a gratitude journal, 15% had participated in a past life or childhood regression. 53% had done some form of affirmation or visualization work. 23% have indulged in psychotropic drugs. 4% tantric sex. 21% some form of loving kindness. And 12% had some other form of spiritual practice that they had engaged in, that they were allowed to fill in. However, interesting, my next question to all that was, if you engaged in any of these spiritual practices, what was your purpose? Why did you do it? And the overwhelming response was for relaxation, to center, period. Nothing further. So I immediately noticed this disconnect between spiritual practices actually being used to connect to spirit or to connect to soul. They stop at this cursory, or what I like to call the media societal answer, for doing practices. It was about some immediate gratification, or this is my opinion, I feel that some of them were engaged in as part of what they believed was some kind of health and wellness or psychological benefit, but not taken with the understanding that there was a spiritual component. Like, for example, you do affirmations to promote yourself or to feel confident, but there was never that additional aspect of you also do it to try to connect to your soul and try to understand your uniqueness and the value of that. There was definitely a line that of spirituality that was not crossed. It stayed very cursory with the self. So my next form on the survey was, the next topic was, where do you get your sources of information on spirituality? And let me pull that up. Oops. So I said, what sources have you used in the past? The lion's share obviously said their family, their friends, some said books and websites. Everything else was podcasts, academic journals, were under 30% or less. So the overwhelming sources were their family, their friends, and books. And then 50% said websites. Okay. And then I asked if they've encountered any difficulty in finding information. 41% said yes. 27% said no. 32% said they hadn't really looked yet, which I also found extremely interesting. And when I asked, it's not here, when I asked the question further, it was because they didn't know what to search. So my last question was, what sources would you use if these sources were available to find answers to spirituality? Which ones would you be most likely to use? Books had 100% as the number one ranking. So books was still number one. A website became number two. With, and mind you, these scores, 380, 367, is because everybody was allowed to answer multiple times. So the lion's share of people definitely still said books. A very close second was the website. And then podcast was even a close third. And then academic journals, online forums, school, etc., gradually decreased from there. So for me, coming off of this survey, I realized that the best way to reach this generation was going to be book, website, podcast. And so that's what I endeavored to do. So that led me to the next part of my project, which was I created materials of information. I created what I am referring to as a primer. So that was my book. I created a beta website. It was a very simplified website, but it provided an interactive format for them to try. And then I also created workbooks. And the workbooks were designed to see if there was a difference between having a primer, which definitely is just a read a book situation, versus a workbook, which requires active participation. And I wanted to see which one this generation responded to better. You know, did they want to do the work, or did they just want to read about it? So with regard to the primer, and I'm going to share for you what that looked like. One second. Okay. Let's see if I can here. Yes. Okay. So hold your eyes. So this is my primer. And my primer consisted of 10 main topics. I wrote about self, soul, spirit, spiritual unfoldment, consciousness, intuition, higher power, chakras, prana, and kundalini, spiritual practices, parapsychology, astrology, religion, and spirituality. Now, these topics, the way that they're designed was I wanted to create a short article that was basically a definition of each topic, and then a very brief but concise and clear discussion of what each one meant. And I wanted to make sure that the language was very plain English so that any person of any academic background or age level should be able to process the words. But based on this, I've given them what I call your search engine keywords. If you start with these and start plugging these into Google, you're going to be able to start down a road of information that's going to be on topic for what you're looking for. The key is that this generation didn't know where to start. So I wanted to give them defined terms to start with so that they can then go on. So the way that the articles looked, as a brief introduction, was, for example, self, soul, spirit. I started all of them with a pop culture quote. So I tied everything into it. It was either a movie quote or a book quote that was very popular for this generation. And something that I wanted to point out that by reading the quote, and then as you read through the material, you would see that spiritual concepts have been in your life for a long time. You just may not have known that's what you were reading or that's what you were hearing. So it's not new. It's just maybe opened up its eyes to you, but it's not new information. So I would start with the pop culture quote, this one from Yoda, and then I would proceed into a definition. This is, I define spirit, and I define self, and I define soul, but I do it a lot with analogy. And the reason why I choose to use analogy is, again, I want to make sure that I'm not coming across academic. I want to make sure that people really have a good foundation to understand. It's when you give context, when you give personal examples, especially to younger people, they can then correlate it to something in their own life and have a better, at least, understanding of the concept, and then can start to develop their own definition or broaden their own definition of the concept for themselves. So I did that with each and every one. And then at the end of each article, I would provide a link, and these are hyperlinks, to books and resources that could take them further. But I wanted to do this as well, like, for example, spiritual unfoldment. I wanted to do this as well because I wanted to make sure that if they were interested after what they read, if they said, oh yeah, this is really cool to me, that there was that instant gratification that they can click something to find out more right away. And number two, that they're going to a reliable source. You know, that I'm not just kind of unleashing them on the internet and saying good luck. Like, I'm taking you to a place where you can find out more information, and then from there find more. So I did that with all 10 concepts, and this was the primer. The next thing that I did was I created workbooks, and I'll pull up one. Professor Mathis has seen this one before because I did it for her class originally. I did, for example, this is a workbook for finding your mission in life. I did one for mindful meditation, one for finding your mission in life, and one for dream work. Very simple. workbook. I got to make it a little smaller so I can flip through the pages here, where I break down into sessions, and these are summaries. For this one in particular, I also did a video, that guided them through the basic concepts of this course. But each explanation is very clear with the exercises. Identify something you consider to be a weakness or fault, and ask yourself the following. And I gave them a place to write the answers, and then write notes and insights. And then each session started with a review of the last, and then into the next. So this was definitely something for them to interact with, and I wanted to see if that felt more germane to their learning process versus just reading materials about this. The last thing that I created was a beta website, and I will share that with you. This is a beta version of a website, and I explained how to interact with it right here. And it included the articles. The articles you'll see are exactly the primer, but here they are on an online format with the links that directly take you to the book. So if I were to click this, it takes you directly to Amazon where you can buy the book if you want to continue. And it also clicks to a PDF. So if you want to read this offline, or if you want to print it out, you can do so once it loads with my slow computer, but you can do so. And you would be able to then read this information in your own time, which a couple people did. This is taking a long time. There it goes. So it's a PDF version of that same article. Okay. And I did, oh wait, sorry, I didn't mean to stop sharing. So I also did a blog where I wrote personal experiences about several spiritual concepts. Again, I wanted to be very clear in this website that there was articles, which is factual information. And then there are personal experiences, which is how these concepts may have shown up in my life, in order to just provide some additional context. As we know, a lot of people learn both from book learning, but they also learn from reading other people's experiences and feeling a kinship in a community that, hey, I'm not the only one who may have experienced this topic in my life or this issue in my life. And then I also did a podcast, and I recorded it in two formats. I did a long form, which I put here, which is the one that I did with Professor Auerbach. So his is the full, I think it's an hour and 15 minutes. And you can listen to the entire interview. And then I did a similar recording with Professor Mathis, but instead with hers, I cut it down into answers to individual questions. And the reason why I did this is because I wanted to see how the young community processes information. Can they sit through an hour-long podcast? Or would they get bored? Or would they try to fast forward? Do they prefer to find the answer to the specific question about some of these topics and get their answer right away? So Professor Mathis's breakdowns are each one is under 8 minutes, the response. So, and it's very specific. That's the question, and we talk about it, and you get the full response by the end of it. And then I also was suggesting to them, how would they respond to a community forum? If there was to be a forum created where people could talk about their spiritual experiences, ask questions, and have, experts in the field respond, how would they interact with that? Would they like that? So I wanted to put that up here on the website as a topic of conversation. Obviously, I didn't complete it because I didn't want to run into any issues with regard to accessing people directly as part of this project. But I did want to tell them that this is something I wanted to see what people's interest was. So I created all three of those materials. And then my next step was I conducted a second survey where I reached out to 6 individuals who indicated after the first survey that they would be willing to learn more and wanted to learn more and wanted to see what materials I might create that were specifically targeted to their generation and their questions. And so I picked 6 people. I'll give you just a brief about them. One person was 20 years old, resides in Arizona, and self-identified as a Black straight male, currently a college student, grew up a devout Christian, and also has ADHD, and that was important for him to tell me that. A next person was 26, comes from New Mexico, and self-identifies as a Latino straight male. Grew up in a Christian household, but currently identifies as spiritual but not religious. The next person was 22, resides in Minnesota, and she self-identifies as a Caucasian lesbian female and has a BA degree. She currently identifies as an atheist who holds out hope. Is how she identifies as spirituality. The next person is 19 and resides in California. They self-identified as a Caucasian non-cisgender individual. Their pronouns were they and them. And they grew up in a defined religious background, but identify as SBNR. The next one was 21, also from Arizona. She self-identifies as a Caucasian bisexual female. And she was raised in a Jewish household and still identifies as Jewish and spiritual. And the last person was 25, resides in Utah. She self-identifies as a Native American straight female, and she is a devout Mormon since birth. So I had all 6 of these individuals review the primer, the website, and the workbooks. And I collected their responses, which were done in more of an essay format. They weren't like directed questions about each material and how they interacted with it. And the results were actually very, very informative for me, because I realized with the primer, I had 2 opinions. Some people said they interacted better with the primer because that's how they choose to learn. They're book learners and they like to read. And they also like the freedom to be able to read when they want to. So they'd read before bed, or, they'd read in the mornings or on the weekends. Some of the other ones, especially the one who said he had ADHD, said he couldn't even approach the primer because seeing that many words and that many pages on the page with that much was an instant shutdown for his brain. So he preferred to read the articles on the website. It made it seem more condensed for him. He was able to pull up one article, read one thing, and be done. So it was easier for his brain to process the information that way. And actually, everybody quite enjoyed the articles on the website. There wasn't anybody who said they didn't like that. It would either be they preferred a book, but they would still read it on the website. Versus there was half of the people who said they weren't into the book at all. Since they knew the information was on the website, that's where they prefer to go. They could pull it up on their phone. They could look at it during the work breaks. And one person said that she was taking it hiking, and when she would stop and take a break, she would read through. She did a similar thing with the workbook where she took it with her. So they liked the fact that it was portable and accessible on a phone and not having to carry paper or book or something with them, which I thought was really interesting. They loved the website format also because they could access it anywhere. So it became a resource. If they had a question, they felt like that's where they would go. They would look it up really fast, be able to get an answer, and move on. So the quickness and the instant gratification aspect of it, and also the shorter attention spans of this generation, because that is the format that they're learning on these days, really made the website the best out of the 3 things that I had put forward as far as the response. The other thing that got a huge response was the podcast. They loved the concept of being able to listen and receive answers, and to be able to listen to people have a discussion about these topics in an intelligent manner that wasn't over their head. That was a big key. It wasn't over their head. So when I asked them specifically, did they prefer the long form or the short form? The only person who liked the long form was the 26-year-old. Everybody who was younger preferred the short responses. They liked the fact that they could listen to the answer to the question they had and then stop if they needed to, move on to something else, come back to it whenever they wanted. And they also felt like that's typically how they go to podcasts, is they have a question. And so they're looking for answers. So to be able to get an answer quickly and get one that they trusted in a format that was enjoyable to listen to. As I said, they loved Professor Mathis's voice, so they loved our conversation. Was extremely helpful and responsive. And they also said, by having me do podcasts about astrology and parapsychology, it really opened their mind to both of them. They were able to find out information that they had never known about both fields. And they said they probably would not have read in a book. So to be able to listen to people who are experts in those fields talk about it with such personal experiences and examples was extremely helpful to them and opened their eyes. And one person actually who did not believe in life after death or psi abilities definitely said that they now have a much more open mind about it. They don't think it refers to them. This was the Mormon. She said she didn't feel that she personally has any of those abilities, but she's more open to understanding that other people might. Whereas before she did not believe that was possible. So
now, Gretchen,
oh, sorry.
I just wanted to point out that we did start late.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the meeting was scheduled for an hour. And so I just want to take the temperature of Ray and, maybe others that are here. If you're able to go a little bit long with us so that Gretchen can begin to wrap things up and then have a little bit of time for question and answers.
I'm literally at the conclusion.
Ah.
Literally at the end.
Wonderful, because I wanted to make sure that if Angie was there that, I know about going long, but at the same time we had technical things too. So I wanted to make sure that we would go long. So sorry about the interruption, and yeah, go ahead with wrapping it up.
So based on the responses that I received to the materials, I decided for myself personally that I'm absolutely going forward with launching this website, which I actually have since the time that I finished the project to now. It is live. I will show it to you. So you can see what the finished product ended up looking like. Hold on a second. So this is the official Come to Yourself website that I've launched. This the artwork was all done by my brother. So shout out to my brother, who is a professional illustrator for comic book collectibles. So this was his interpretation of me explaining what Come to Yourself was. And as you can see, this is the homepage. So we describe what it is. And then I also outline everybody's journey through a 5-panel piece of art. And I describe where you're starting and what the website does for you. So right here, I'm saying you're taking your first steps forward on your journey. And in the process of doing this, you should go to the guidance section, which has all the articles and the courses for information to learn. And then I say, you're now probably, as you're learning more, going to experience some tension in your life. You're going to acknowledge some truths about yourself you may not, have known were there. And therefore, you may want to start looking in the experiences section to really see how other people have, progressed on their journey and maybe get examples for how to cope and how to view things based on what you're experiencing. And then I talk about resolution and return. So basically coming to yourself, finding your authentic self, finding your unique value in this life through this website. Look in here, the guidance section. I start off with a very clear breakdown of the spiritual centers that currently are in existence here, both in the United States and worldwide, so that people can go to as a resource. I talk about ISEN, I talk about the ARE, I talk about the Rhine Center, and I provide links to all of them, including the resource databases. Okay, and this is where everybody starts, spiritual centers. Next place I go is I talk about what is transpersonal psychology. provide a definition. And then I also asked Professor Mathis and Professor Auerbach to provide their definitions. And as I interview more people, I'm going to ask them to provide theirs, because everybody says it differently, but they all tie together. And I think it's really important for people to hear, because one way of listening to it may not resonate, but another might. So, and then I go into the articles, as you saw, the same as the other page, and it's in the same format. So you get the hyperlinks and you get the same text, and you get a pithy quote at the top. And it ties together. So these are the articles. They're the same as they were from the original website. Everybody responded to them really well, so I didn't change this format. The experiences I've expanded. So I have the blog posts, which I update regularly. I haven't done it today, but I update them regularly. The podcast, these are the complete podcasts now. I took Professor Auerbach's podcast and put his in the short form format. So as you can see, his is an 11-part podcast. And I explain what each topic is so that you can directly click on it. If you want to learn what psychokinesis is, you click on it, takes you to the podcast page, you listen to the podcast. When there's also a full transcript as well of what we talk about. And then here's Professor Mathis's podcast as well, all broken down with an example of what each is. And there's also a section that I've added called Creative Spirit, where I specifically interview people who are in the creative fields. This person, Tony, is a primary drummer producer. I interviewed my brother, who's an artist. I also have interviews coming up with 2 more recording artists. Because I really, and on these interviews, I specifically ask them how spirituality has manifested through their art, and how they've encountered on their own spiritual journeys being an artist, being so open emotionally and vulnerable all the time, and how they interact in a world that isn't, and how they maintain their connection to spirit, and how that manifests through their art, and how they share that through their art. I also have been leading seminars and to the LGBTQ community, and I have a book club where we talk about specific books that weren't written for a spiritual basis yet have a lot of spiritual topics and concepts in them. And so I feel that this is a great way for people to understand that you know this information, it just hasn't been presented to you, with the topic of spirituality on it. And I sponsor some stuff, and there's a community forum that I'm about to build. So that's the current website, which constantly gets updated and evolves. And the podcast is still super popular. It gets anywhere from 20 to 30 downloads a week since I've put it up. So people are reaching it, people are finding it, and people are learning from it. And that's ultimately what my goal was to reach out to this younger community and try to provide a safe space for them to find information on these topics. So I'm hoping that for the future, this maybe inspires other people to do the same. I really feel that it's incumbent on the educated spiritual community, you in particular, all of the universities who, have such learned and knowledgeable experts, to try to reach out more. And I know that may not be a popular thing for me to say, but I feel it's important to say it. I think a lot of people at a lot of universities can get locked up in academia, and I really feel that there is a paradigm shift happening right now, and we need more outreach, and we need to create more of a spiritual community for the younger people to tap into, who can't wait for graduate school or afford graduate school, to get the proper information. And the more that we can do this for them, I feel that we can aid that shift, and really change consciousness that's going on today, because it's time. And that is the end of my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolutely wonderful. The amount that you were able to pull together, definitely exceeds where you thought and we thought that you would be able to get to. And so I want to congratulate you for bringing it this far, and that there's such a seamless moment for you in terms of your post-AU life. You know, I can really see the momentum, the fun, you know, that
Mhm.
you'll have engaging this part of your life and growing it. And
Absolutely.
there's just so many seeds that you were able to tell us, let alone the things that you haven't,
Mhm.
for, you know, how I anticipate this to grow for you. And so maybe I'll open it up to Ray, and I don't know how many other people are here, but open it up to questions, if anyone has any. And if not,
Okay.
I might have a thing or two.
Well, I'm just blown away. I mean, this is an amazing amount of work, and not just focused work, but broad, just a broad spectrum of what you've done with this material.
Yeah.
Now, I have one question, I guess, comment. I'd like to know your opinion. Carl Jung, of course, was of another generation, obviously, and he was gone long before these young people were born. How do you feel about his idea that young people should not be focused on spirituality? They should be extroverting, out in the world, building an ego, getting married, having a family, having a career, and that at midlife then was the appropriate moment for people to turn within, that at that point they had a strong and healthy ego to deal with what might come up. And I just wondered, what's your opinion about those ideas?
I would like to agree with him, and personally I do agree, given my generation and when I grew up, and how long I felt that I needed to spend time in the world to develop, you know, my outer public persona, as I call my shield, you know, so that it would be there for when I wanted to work on my personal, you know, understanding of self. But I don't feel that that's where we live today. I feel that we have two things going on. One, the predominant culture is isolated. You know, people don't communicate. They're not out in the world. They're not in the workplace, you know, like they used to be. A lot of people are entrepreneurs and setting up their own businesses and have their own lives, you know, that are isolated and bubbled from other people. Like interaction with the rest of the world has now going through machines. You know, it's going through text and internet. People don't use their phone to talk on the phone. People don't see each, you know, pre-COVID, post-COVID, like people don't see each other. So I feel the need to develop the public persona, this ego, you know, for the world, for the benefit of society. I don't think it holds the same weight anymore. I feel like, if anything, I would prefer more young people to develop a stronger sense of self based on their own unique value, you know, to society, because I don't believe we need cogs to keep the machine going anymore. I think the machine has changed, where I think we need creativity and individuality and, you know, people to push us forward. That's really why I'm in love, you know, with the LGBTQ community in particular, because their boldness to live life on their terms and attempt to do so in the face of everybody telling them not to me is exactly that shift. And I want them to have the confidence, you know, to keep doing that. And I feel like that confidence needs to come from understanding your own unique value. You know, the differences you have and are displaying, that's why you're here. You know, that's why you're here today in this life. And we don't need you to conform. We need you to be you and push us forward, drag us forward, you know, to some degree, you know, take us into the next evolution, you know, because I feel like that's where we are. So I feel that them developing a public persona is dampening their shine. You know, I would rather them instead focus more inward first. That's my personal feeling of where we are.
And Jung might agree. I don't know. He wrote a book called Ion about the changing of the ages, where the religious container shatters. And that's kind of where we are. And so it may be that young people, whereas when I grew up, the religious container was still pretty formed and solid, and now it's not.
Yeah.
And so it's a new ball game.
Yeah, I feel like asking people to conform, or asking people to, you know, develop their personality based on societal norms and public opinion and acceptance is really what's holding us back now. Like, I feel like we had a generation do that, you know, the millennials do that. And they're the ones that I interact with the most are just kind of lost, you know, because the new generation doesn't need them to be that. They need to be individuals. They need to, you know, like we don't have creative geniuses anymore, you know, not in any of the arts or anything else. Like they're rare and really few and far between, and they've had to fight 10 times as hard to get there. And I feel like it's holding us back as a culture. So yeah, I would prefer people not to work so hard on their public persona, you know, by the time they're 20, 25. I would rather them really start to focus on themselves, you know, like work on it enough so that you're safe and protected, you know, in society enough, you know, where you could find your community. But then, you know, really start focusing on what makes you unique, and, you know, and how you're gonna pull us forward, how you're gonna change minds.
I love where Ray took us, because it combines the very large strengths that you've brought to the project and one component that you can add as you're going forward, because this is just a beginning, really, and you can only do so much given the time that you've had. And so, you know, the fact that you brought in with Generation Z about labels being more fluid, and then the plus in LGBTQ plus, you know, one of those things is fluidity, and that interestingly, the plus people are going to be a big part going forward in influencing the other letters before the plus. And that in bringing those components to Ray's question, the thing that would be interesting is bringing in aspects of the transpersonal psychological, right? And so, you know, with, you know, Jung, you know, he, on the one hand, had very good reason to go with what he was saying. He had his own personal experience about what it means to dip into these waters, depending on what happens, right? That, you know, a strong psychological base is important. And you know, it's wonderful that you talked about how you were countering the young people's narratives, you know, that they're kind of in it to feel in a certain way better and better, right? To relax and feel better. But the component of spiritual practice is very much not necessarily a linear piece of that, right? So to have the psychological in mind right away, you know, like you might have come to this website thinking more in quote spiritual terms, but that what that word even means because of, say, integral spirituality, as just one instance, you know, that the psychological is actually a part of the spiritual rather than something separate. And so how then to present it to young people in a way that is compelling is a part of, you know, a fun challenge going forward. And that you're right on in terms of spiritual community. Ever since, you know, the counterculture of the 1960s, it was a part of breaking down components. And now, you know, we're moving into the sort of what's next. And so then COVID has been thrown into this, right? Just amplifying the lack of community. And so it'll be interesting. I think that I've just come upon a question, because in certain ways we've talked a lot, right? And I was hoping, you know, that there might be one, and it just came just now. Do you have any thoughts whether it's 6 months or a year from now or something longer, where there's the potential for the say all the materials that you have has a
Mhm.
sense of completeness on its own for a percentage of people, but then there's a component to opening it up for local interaction that's personal, in other words, people actually physically getting together, and that can
Yes.
be,
Mhm.
yeah, part of its loose structure.
Yeah, I've actually kind of started that as an experiment, but with that in mind. I've been offering or facilitating seminars for this LGBTQ resource called Some of Us, which is pretty much the only like major health and wellness targeted LGBTQ community. And they put on, it has been virtual fest because of COVID, but prior to that and after, they put on a live festival, every quarter, where they bring together people in the community to talk about health and wellness issues. And in particular, because I've been facilitating some of these seminars, they're starting to incorporate spiritual and transpersonal psychological concepts, into part of the health and wellness discussion, so that it's about making those connections where we're not just talking about, mindful meditation, but really talking about, trying to tie in why your LGBTQ perspective is unique, why you're, for example, why your soul may have chosen in this life to be manifest in a male form versus a female form. And does that, if you connect with your soul and start that dialogue and open that portal of conversation, maybe you will feel less, confused in the word, but less, restricted, less lost, and less, of not feeling that you have value or that you're born in the wrong body, if you realize or accept that maybe this was a choice for this lifetime. Or maybe if you, comprehend the idea that you chose to be, even though you may identify at a soul level with a certain energy, maybe in this life you chose to be born as the opposite, to have a learning experience or to provide, guidance and understanding to somebody else. Maybe this is your purpose because you are strong enough to handle the adversity and the tension, going forward to aid others. And by providing that perspective on that, a spiritual level, it certainly, in one of the seminars that I was facilitating, it really opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that every being is unique, and that everything may be bigger than just what you're experiencing today in this life. And that if you can see it from that perspective, you really achieve a different level of health and wellness. It isn't just about the mind, body, spirit, generality of wellness. It is really about understanding your place on the long journey of spiritual unfoldment, and it's providing a lot of people peace, and understanding in that they may serve a bigger purpose in this life, than the one that they originally were thinking.
Your questionnaire, and other factors sort of does show that, perhaps in terms of numbers in the population, that spiritual crisis, may be on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that there's a component, perhaps a small component, right, in terms of not frightening
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yeah.
That spiritual crisis is a normal part of the process for, a given percentage of the population, and here's where you can go.
Exactly. And that's why I wanted to put that in the website. I talk about crisis in the spiritual unfoldment article. And then I also obviously direct from the very beginning. Here are the spiritual centers. Here are all the resources. I link them to the ISIN US base as well as the world base, where they can find, a center in their community, and very specifically say, you can talk to these people, you can reach out. That's why they're there, is to help guide you through any of these things that you may be feeling. I felt that was super important, because I do agree, and I do feel that spiritual crisis is on the rise, and there's a potential of a lot of misunderstanding. And the way I see it primarily is with more and more young people being, prescribed medication that just, I feel is way over the top for what they're experiencing, or people being misidentified as being on the spectrum, when they may just be undergoing a crisis or an anxiety issue or anything else. You know what I mean? Like regular psychiatry is trying to address these topics because they're coming up in young people. And these are the people who don't have any basis in what spirituality and transpersonal psychology is, so if your 12-year-old is experiencing a crisis, what do you do as an adult who's never been exposed to these concepts? Certainly your 12-year-old isn't these concepts. And that's why I feel like the outreach is really important. I really feel that people need to understand that there is something apart from traditional Western scientific psychiatry and, Judeo-Christian religion. Like there is this underlying, pardon me, I'm being like, proselytizing, but underlying truth, spiritual truth that exists, that if more people, were just aware, that this is just as valid and just as old and just as, proven as everything else, then, we may do better by our young people. We may do better by not trying to address what's going on with them in ways that I feel are harmful.
Your project makes me think that, it might be a good idea. I don't know if, anyone at ARE, perhaps a brief conversation with James is in order, that at a certain point, whether it's 6 months, a year, or 2 years from now, you have it at the next level to speak to, the wider ARE, AU community, to do, another presentation of what you're doing so that you can get, more out of the, expand, your audience here for what has been produced through the institution, but then also a greater opportunity to hear from the institution for question and answers. That's a long wind up towards, does anyone have any last questions?
I don't have questions, but I have a couple of comments. One, I love what you're doing. I wish there was that type of resource available when I was younger and questioning. I mean, I resorted to just going to Barnes and Nobles or the bookstore and just cruising like the New Age section to try to get all of my answers. Yeah. So I think it's amazing what you're doing. I feel like the passion from it. There's a lot of work, a lot of excellent work that really put into it. And two, it's probably one of the best culminating projects that I've attended. So congratulations. And you did like such an excellent job. And you didn't need the prep session. It was flawless. It was flawless.
I'm a lawyer. We do Zoom. I just want to make sure.
You did great.
I would want to add though, especially because this is being recorded and I feel like this is my time to throw it out there. I really feel that there is a tremendous opportunity if communities like ARE and other spiritual centers would connect with social workers. I feel that there's a lot of openness in the social worker, community for understanding spirituality, especially as they work with, a lot of these teens and people who are displaced because of, coming out and other, trauma that they've experienced, and just, from sometimes it's they're on the spectrum and people don't understand them, and, or it's, as I said, they've come out and the family has rejected them and they're on the streets. And, I really feel that if social workers had a better handle and a better language and, to discuss with these young people who are experiencing, some of them in spiritual crisis, some of them just looking for, some foundation or validation of their belief system, that we could really help a lot of people in this generation as well. The social workers are usually the first place that they're parked. It's usually a social worker who comes in as the first responder in a lot of these situations. And I feel that if the spiritual community and, the social work community had some connection, some dialogue and active interaction, I really feel that we can make a difference there too.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point, because within transpersonal psychology, I've noticed that they are often among the more expensive people to work with, because of the amount of experience that they've had. Like, usually they're the more experienced people in the field, and then the extra training that was
Mhm.
involved. That it's really interesting in terms of the there are networks where social workers are actually a part of it in the transpersonal
Mhm.
field, but in terms of creating some greater emphasis within that community, where someone who might be referred to one way or another, a psychologist, that perhaps, having that additional component of a social worker with
Or even like
sliding
a lot of
scale,
these social workers.
or pro bono.
Yeah, a lot of these social workers, and I know a couple. That's why I'm referring to this. Is they're changing the educational paradigms right now. They're rewriting the textbooks to accommodate these new shifts in identity and gender, politics, sexual orientation, and stuff, to make sure that they're communicating with this generation effectively, and even just getting a section in a textbook, so that somebody who's studying to become a social worker is aware that there's a different type of psychological approach, or different, ways, or an aspect or a way to look at situation that they may encounter, with somebody, where they may, instead of just saying, oh, this person is X, they may go, maybe they're experiencing a spiritual emergence, or maybe they're experiencing a spiritual crisis. Let me refer them this way, or let me enter, you know what I mean? Just make it, as I said, they're like the first responders. They're the first ones on the scene. And I feel like if they were given at least a base level education, in some of these topics, it could inform how they then aid young people,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know that there's a lot of people rewriting the textbooks now, and I clearly am not skilled enough to, to contribute to that. But I really think that this community, this academic community, absolutely could, and I feel that that would be like a great entry point.
Yeah, and you can highlight those, that because you have a bit of the potential for a network hub.
Yeah,
You can highlight those who, yeah, are doing that work.
yeah,
Well,
because they have to treat people with the broadest paintbrush possible. You know what I mean? Like, they encounter people from all religions, all backgrounds, all creeds, all races. So they have to be the most open to how to interact, with these young people. And therefore, I feel like they also could add this to their toolbox,
yeah.
as one more thing, that makes them aware when they have to deal, with kids who are in trouble. And I feel like they would be the most open to receiving the information. I don't feel it would conflict with everything else that they, have in their, like I said, in their repertoire, and trying to help people. I think it'd be really cool. That's my
Well,
two
thank you.
cents.
Yeah, thank you so much for your 2 cents and your presentation today, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
degree well earned. And
Thank
I look
you.
forward to hearing more as all of this unfolds for you going forward.
Well, everyone's going to hear more, because I think I still get to keep my email address for a little bit longer. So I'm about to blast everybody and try to schedule everybody for a podcast interview. Now that this is over, I can talk to everybody, and have these open discussions, because I really, it's the feedback that I get. Like, I'm not saying that in any kind of a, pat myself on the shoulder way. It's so awesome, to hear, young people emailing me. There's this one person in France who emails me all the time, because every time I put up an episode, they listen in to say, we don't have anything like this out here, and I think it's really awesome that they can have the same kind of conversations that I get to have. They get to listen in and really see how accessible the information is, and not have it, try to discern it, through a textbook that's hard for them, or wait until they're, 28 to enroll in school to learn. They really get like a top-notch introduction into the field. I want to try to get everybody who's on faculty, I'm trying to get on this podcast. Just saying.
So your email is actually good indefinitely. So you'll be able to keep the email indefinitely, and I will make sure that the presentation gets out to the rest of the faculty, because I know they're going to be so thrilled to see this.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And, I've given Professor Mathis my thank yous for the last year and a half. And, thank you, thank you, thank you. But I haven't had a chance because, I try to keep everything straight up and down. But seriously, Ted, thank you from the bottom of my heart for guiding me through this process. It's been beyond helpful to me and validating for me. And you've been a great facilitator on this project. So thank you.
You're welcome, and you have my gratitude for everything that you were able to put together, into the AU staff and faculty who are helping behind the scenes. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks so much. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Excellent. Yay.